Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Oof, it's sobering to hear all those degrees read, I have to be honest, but ethnobotany is cool. This is a true thing. Beloveds, wow, my heart is full just seeing your faces and hearing where you're from and hearing the connections that are happening even outside of Colorado and across the movement. There's something generative and sacred and meaningful in that. And so I just want to take a breath and acknowledge something that has already formed and already succeeded and already come into being through the good work of the leaders that you've been hearing from up until this point. Thank each one of you for this offering. It matters so much, so much in community. I want to briefly tell you that I'm in Oakland, California, where right now the air is dangerous. There are wildfires, and of course it was 100 degrees today, which does not happen in the Bay Area. So my very neutral, kind of boring background is because it is a place I can perch in my room that has an air filter and cooling. I did pre-record this conversation, so if there are any issues with the download, I hope you will just use the recording I sent you, Mateo, and for us to simply say, I hope that all those who control PG&E and our power in the midst of crisis will not interrupt us, but if we are interrupted, you can hear what remains, because it has already been sent to all of you. So my heart is already full, but I am here, so let me share some thoughts with you anyway. This is a good evening, I believe, to lean into community. I think we're already seeing the power of that. I'm feeling it in familiar faces and new beloveds. To lean into the kind of growth that particularly happens when we are together. I want to both congratulate and thank you for being present for this Black, Indigenous, People of Color speaker series and for all that this opportunity represents. It is no small thing to center the spiritual deepening and communal relationality that emerges when we create sacred space for and with one another. It matters that the leaders in your community envisioned this time and space as a gift. That's what I heard Mateo talking about in the video advertising this series, as a gift. It matters that 7 sponsoring congregations said yes. It matters that each one of you is here in real time or engaging later as you are able. Black, Indigenous, people of color, sacred space is Unitarian Universalist, period. As you heard, I am the Rev Dr Sofia Betancourt, and it is my privilege to serve at Star King. I serve as an associate professor, as you heard, and this fall, I am also serving as our acting president, as the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt takes a well-deserved sabbatical. I am a multiracial and multi-ethnic Afro-Latinx cisgender woman. I am fat, queer, temporarily able-bodied, raised middle class. I'm the daughter of 2 proud immigrants, and I have an outsized level of educational privilege. There are many aspects to my lived social identities that others use to justify thinking of me as a rare exception in Unitarian Universalism. And I'm here to tell you that just like any other aspect of claiming our full humanity, numbers neither justify nor erase my UU identity. What makes me a Unitarian Universalist is my lived practice of faithfully embodying UU values morning by morning and day by day, as they say in the Black Church. It is my commitment to UU communities. It's my membership as a Blue Beloved and in the Church of the Larger Fellowship. In essence, of course, UUs look, sound, act, think, and live like me because I am a Unitarian Universalist. Why am I starting here? I know that the gift of this speaker series is born of the hope that an ongoing, living, and loving community of Black, Indigenous, people of color UUs in the greater Colorado area, I'm guessing with some radical hospitality and loving guests will connect with one another and choose to continue in covenanted relationship moving forward. This, of course, lives at the heart of how we are with one another as UUs. We build communities of beloveds who in covenanted relationship engage and support each other in the spiritual aspects of our living. Now I can imagine some trickling worries that I might have erased somehow the work of justice as I say that. But justice, equity, and compassion live at the center of our shared ideals. To be a faithful UU is to strive for a world that honors the sacred worth of all people and all beings. It is to understand that striving as a sacred act, grounded in love. Now, please note that I said all peoples and all beings, but not all behaviors. We each, in our own ways, work to create a more just world than the one that we know. And when we falter, as all of us do, as I do, we trust that others in our community of faith will call us back to the values that brought us together in the first place. This is how we have held one another in love since the 1600s. And that matters because your organizers have asked me what message I most want to offer to BIPOC UUs in this moment. Allow me to be clear that this is not my own wisdom. It is a gift that was given to me and that I pass along to you because that is how our communities survive the unimaginable. Elders in our movement, both with the wisdom of age and the wisdom of years in the struggle, when facing profound uncertainty in Unitarian Universalism that came to yet another peak in 2017, asked two primary things of our co-presidents at that time. They offered the same two primary things to the Commission on Institutional Change that was still being formed. They asked us to stop describing Unitarian Universalism as a predominantly white faith. They asked us to express our living tradition, our theologies, our liturgies, and our commitments through a lens of liberation. What do I most want to say to us in community this evening? Let us stop wasting time and breath on the question of whether the work of dismantling white supremacy culture is authentic to Unitarian Universalism. Let us stop derailing our own discernment, that work of figuring out what is most central to us, what matters most in our religious lives, with questions of whether we fit, belong, represent, or somehow derail the tradition that we were born into or chose later in our lives. There have been documented Universalist and Unitarian leaders of color in our midst for a long time. I should also say Unitarian Universalist leaders of color in our midst for a long time, not that we should have to justify our presence by our history. Folks didn't just up and decide to plot a takeover in New York City in the late 1960s. And even if they had, we likely still would have benefited immensely by that service. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who is particularly dear to my heart, was born in 1825. This fierce Black abolitionist and suffragist was a Unitarian who also attended the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Her public speaking in the name of justice resounds with values that remain central to an authentic Unitarian Universalism to this day. Now, am I saying that there is nothing left to do around dismantling the lingering systems, traces, and influences of white supremacy culture within our beloved tradition. Of course not. This is the work. And we do it on this intimate level so that it echoes out into the world and influences structures larger than our own. Does it hurt my heart that some of our leaders are arguing against our anti-racism commitments while the current occupant of the White House denounces that same work as anti-American propaganda? Of course it does. It embarrasses me. The wisdom of keeping our eyes on the prize was passed to us at great cost. I just think the debate about whether that work has value has been one of the most effective ways of allowing beloveds among us to wield unearned privilege without cost. At best, truly at best, it is a distraction. And at worst, it is an intentional corruption of the central teachings of our faith. And I know through experience and through the hard-won wisdom of those who came before me that we must not sacrifice our own spiritual development, our faith practices, our time with those who keep us healthy and whole entirely to the work of teaching our white beloveds, even those precious who are our white family members and our partners, that we are just as Unitarian Universalist as they are, that our cultural norms and expressions are as central to today's faithful living as those drawn from European cultures, that many of us too embody, that we are not a statistic to monitor, a brown face to cultivate, nor an entertaining deviation from regular worship at certain culturally rooted festivals during the church year. What would you do with your time if you invested it primarily in living a faithful Unitarian Universalism that you recognize culturally? How might your leadership change? What new practices would either emerge or take much greater priority in your schedule? What is the work for justice that might become central in our faith-based organizing if we weren't as distracted by fake fights here at home? We know what some of this looks like. We've seen it. We've experienced and lived it. It looks like the unabashed claiming of Black sacred space through blue havens and harbors. It looks like drum regional communities emerging across the nation. It looks like reading and engaging, widening the circle of concern and starting with the recommendations that would most immediately deepen our sense of welcome and home within Unitarian Universalism. We experience it when our UUA Board of Trustees and our President, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, call us to work to defund the police rather than processing yet another complaint that anti-racism work is somehow co-opting our faith. Let me pause just briefly here to thank and acknowledge Adlandria Williams and the Reverend Barb Grieve for their exemplary and sacrificial service. This work looks like building a beloved community of Black, Indigenous, people of color UUs in Colorado and expanding what that means across the nation and maybe the world, as one of you said. It means embracing all that such a covenanted group has to offer. It means rooting ourselves in what we truly know. I have been in leadership in the UUA long enough to remember when Black, Indigenous, people of color communities could only gain funding through the National Office for Anti-Racism Work. Meaning that coming together in numbers large enough to forge sustainable groups was only paid for if we spent the majority of our time learning about racism. That same primary requirement was not expected of our white beloveds. I will forever remember and be grateful for Dr. Mark Hicks and the Reverend Dr. Kiyama Rahman when they began making a joyful noise about our need to have theological gatherings, spiritual programming, efforts to sustain our health and well-being, not in place of anti-racism work, obviously, but in addition, central, valued, ours, starting with the assumption that our belonging here in community was about more than preparedness to educate white beloveds about the workings of white supremacy culture, about the harm of collusion with generations of US racialized oppression. Can we imagine ourselves radically authorized, spiritually grounded, prophetically committed, guided by the youngest among us, while filled by the wisdom of generations, fully present, beautifully represented, and entirely whole? Because the truth, of course, is that we already are. And allowing that knowing to fill our bones, no matter how weary our internal support structures might be, in this time of pandemic, this time of combating police brutality, of struggling for voter rights again, and opposing the rise of fascism again, no matter how tired we may be, no matter how hard it is, knowing what we mean when we claim our inherent worth and dignity, that wisdom will sustain us throughout our days, even in the unspeakable moments, even in the joys that surpass our understanding. And we cannot access that knowing alone. This is why we build communal spaces as Black, Indigenous people of color. It is not to erase the vital importance of our individual cultural identities. It's not to separate ourselves from our white beloveds or loved ones. It is to say instead that we are committed to one another, to journeying together not only spiritually, but while wrestling with the generations-long legacy of what it means to dismantle and counteract all that the dominance, unearned privilege, and mythologies of whiteness lay on our bodies every single day. It is recognizing that we are stronger together and that we can share our cultural wisdom with one another without the worries about colonizing or co-opting dangers that are sometimes still live in our larger communities, and that might cause us to share differently in broader communal space. Community matters. BIPOC spaces matter. Black, Indigenous, people of color, Unitarian, Universalist spaces offer us the grace of homecoming that strengthens our journeys with the larger communities that live and thrive in our spirits and in our hearts. And the priority of that journey, of that growth, is what I most wish for you as this sacred community continues to grow into being. May you be blessed with questions that move and shape you. May you be nourished in the face of difficulty, challenged by ideas that differ from your own, held accountable for the ways that you might need to lean further into right relationship. And may you be held in an all-embracing love that knows you and that will not let you go. I am honored to be in sacred community with you all. May our antepasados, our ancestors of every glorious gender expression and none, lend us their strength and guidance along the way. May it be so. Thank you.